She didn't build a stronger house. She built a way to walk through winter and come back alive. The first time they saw it, they laughed. Not quietly, not with restraint. Open laughter. The kind that spreads. The kind that decides something for everyone at once. Carrie stood beside the frame, half finished, bent willow ribs arcing between the house and the silo. A shape that didn't look like anything they understood. "A tunnel?" the older Reinhardt boy asked. She nodded. "A tunnel." He laughed before she finished the word, turned to his brother. "A tunnel," he repeated, like the word itself was enough to dismiss it. The younger one leaned forward in his saddle, studying it. "You building a basket big enough to live in?" More laughter. Carrie didn't respond, because explanation doesn't change what people are not ready to understand. And understanding wasn't required, only completion. They rode off, still laughing. The sound carried longer than they did, across the fence line, past the house, into the road. By evening, the story had spread. The widow building a woven tunnel. The woman who thought branches could stop winter. By the next week, others came, not to help, to see, to confirm what they already believed. Men stood at a distance, hands on hips, watching, measuring nothing, understanding less. "You think that will hold snow?" one asked. "It doesn't need to hold snow," Carrie said. "It needs to slow wind." He shook his head. "Wind doesn't slow." She kept working, because argument wastes time, and time was the only thing she didn't have enough of. Homestead came once, then again, not laughing, not convinced, just watching. He walked the length of it, pressed the woven sides, felt how it moved, flexible, not rigid. "That won't stop cold," he said. "It's not meant to," Carrie replied. He looked at her, waiting. She didn't explain, because he wasn't ready to hear it yet. "This will fail," he said finally. "Then it will fail," she answered. He nodded once, not agreement, not approval, acknowledgement. Then he left. Summer passed, not in large changes, in small ones. Spacing tightened, gaps reduced, layers added. Mud pressed into the weave, dried, cracked, reapplied. Nothing trusted without testing, nothing finished without adjustment. Carrie walked it every day, morning, evening, after wind, after rain, after heat. Not looking at it, listening to it, where air moved, where it didn't, where pressure built, where it released. Because systems don't fail at their strongest points. They fail at the ones no one notices. By late August, it no longer looked like branches. It looked intentional, shaped, defined, still not solid, but no longer temporary. The children used it, ran through it, played inside it. Their voices changed in there, muted, contained. Even that mattered, because sound follows air, and air reveals everything. September brought colder nights, not dangerous yet, but enough to measure difference. Inside the tunnel, the cold arrived slower, stayed less sharp, left later. Not warmth, delay. And delay, when repeated enough times, becomes survival. The first real wind came in October. Not a storm, a test. Steady, constant, pressing across open land. Carrie stood inside the tunnel and felt it. The structure bent, shifted, absorbed. The wind didn't pass cleanly through. It broke, split, slowed. By the time it reached her, it had lost something. Not everything, but enough. And that was the first time it stopped being a tunnel and became a system. They were measuring the wrong thing. That was the problem. Not the house, not the tunnel, not even the cold itself. They were measuring strength, when winter was testing something else entirely. Carrie had learned that the first year, not from failure, from loss. The distance between the house and the silo was only 30 steps, not far, not dangerous in any other season. But winter doesn't measure distance the same way. It measures exposure. The first time she made that walk in deep cold, she thought it would be simple. A quick trip, a task finished before the air had time to matter. But halfway across, something changed. The wind didn't feel stronger. It felt closer. It pressed against her coat, found its way through seams, along her neck, into her sleeves. Not all at once, not violently, but constantly. By the time she reached the silo door, her hands weren't responding the same way. Her breath had shortened, her steps slower than they should have been. Nothing dramatic, nothing visible from a distance, but something had been taken. And the walk back was worse, because loss compounds. What you lose going out, you don't get back before returning. That was the part no one talked about. Inside the house, they were fine. Inside the barn, the animals held. But between them, that was where winter did its work. Not in one moment, in accumulation, step by step, breath by breath, heat leaving faster than it could be replaced. She watched the others that season, men stronger than her, better dressed, heavier coats, thicker gloves, still struggling, still slowing, still losing something every time they crossed open ground. Some started running, thinking speed would solve it. It didn't, because running doesn't reduce loss. It just shortens the time you notice it. Others made fewer trips, avoided the walk entirely, but that created a different problem. Food delayed, animals unattended, work undone. Winter doesn't just test survival. It tests everything you need to keep living. That was when she understood. The house wasn't the problem. The fire wasn't the problem. The cold wasn't even the problem. Movement was. Moving through it, exposing yourself to it, letting it take something every time you stepped outside. That was where survival broke. Not in one failure, in repetition. 30 steps, taken twice a day, every day. That adds up. Not in distance, in loss. So she stopped thinking about how to build stronger walls and started thinking about that space between. The open air, the unprotected path, the place where everything was taken, little by little. If she could change that, she wouldn't need a stronger house. She wouldn't need a bigger fire. She would need less recovery. Because if you don't lose it, you don't have to fight to get it back. That was the shift. Not survival through resistance. Survival through reduction. You don't stop winter. You stop giving it something to take. And that meant the walk itself had to change. Once she understood the problem, the solution stopped looking strange. It stopped being about building something strong and became about building something that changed behavior. She didn't start with walls. She started with movement. The first frame she built wasn't rigid. It bent. Willow branches, cut fresh, still alive enough to flex, driven into the ground in pairs, then arched over, forming ribs instead of beams. Not straight lines, curves. Because straight lines carry force. Curves break it. She spaced them carefully, not evenly, intentionally uneven. Because uniform structure creates predictable flow, and predictable flow is easy for the wind to follow. She wove smaller branches between them, layer after layer, not tight at first, testing. She walked through it while the wind moved, felt where it slipped through, where it pushed harder, where it lost strength. Then she adjusted, closed one section, opened another, added thickness where pressure built, reduced it where air needed to pass. Because stopping the air completely would create something worse. Pressure. And pressure always finds a way through. So she didn't stop it. She slowed it. The second layer changed everything. Mud pressed into the weave, not sealing it, interrupting it. Each gap smaller, each opening less direct, each path longer. The wind entered, but it couldn't move the same way. It had to turn, then turn again, then lose speed before reaching the other side. That was the point. Not blocking, breaking the path. She added weight where it needed stability, lightness where it needed to flex, because rigid structures fight force. Flexible ones absorb it. The first time a strong gust hit the frame, it moved, bent inward, then returned. Didn't crack, didn't resist, adapted. That was when she knew it wouldn't fail the way the others expected. She built the entrance last, not wide, not open, offset, because a straight entrance creates a straight path, and a straight path invites loss. Inside, she kept the space narrow, just enough to walk, not enough for air to gather speed. The floor stayed earth, packed, slightly lower than the outside, holding what little warmth collected instead of letting it drift away. By the time she finished, it looked stronger. It looked fragile. A woven shape between two solid buildings. Something temporary. Something that shouldn't survive. They passed by again, slowed down, looked closer this time. "It'll collapse under snow," one said. "It'll tear in the first real wind," another added. Carrie didn't answer, because they were still measuring the wrong thing. They were looking at strength. She was building control. And control doesn't look impressive until something tries to take it away. The first real test came before winter. A long wind, steady, pressing across the ridge. She walked through the tunnel, stopped halfway, closed her eyes, and felt it. The wind entered, but it didn't carry through. It weakened, lost direction, lost distance. By the time it reached her, it wasn't the same wind anymore. That was enough, because if it couldn't travel cleanly, it couldn't take everything with it. And that meant, for the first time, the walk might not cost her anything. The storm didn't announce itself. It tightened. Day by day, the wind stopped shifting, stopped changing, and settled into one direction: north. By the third day, it no longer felt like weather. It felt like pressure. Constant, heavy, unbroken. The kind that doesn't pass through, it stays. That was when movement stopped. Not completely, but enough. The first sign was distance. People began measuring everything by how far they had to go, not by time, not by effort, by exposure. The walk to the barn, the trip to the well, the crossing between buildings. Each one became a decision. Each one carried cost. At first, they tried to move faster, running, leaning into the wind, forcing their way through it. It didn't help, because speed doesn't reduce loss. It just hides it until it's too late. Then came hesitation, fewer trips, delayed work. Animals left longer than they should have been, because every time they stepped outside, something was taken. Not all at once, not enough to stop them immediately, but enough to accumulate. One man slipped halfway to his barn, didn't get back up right away. Not because he couldn't, because his body didn't respond the same way. Another tried to cross at dusk, turned back before reaching the door. Not out of fear, out of loss. Because by then they were starting to understand. The danger wasn't inside the house. It was between them. Carrie watched it from the edge of her doorway, not stepping out immediately, not rushing to act. Because rushing into that kind of cold costs more than it solves. She waited, then stepped into the tunnel. The difference was immediate. Not warmth, reduction. The wind entered, but it didn't hold its shape. It broke, turned, lost direction. By the time it reached her, it had already given something up. She walked slowly, not rushing, not forcing movement, because nothing inside was taking from her. Step by step, the distance no longer cost the same. The door to the silo opened, closed, and she turned back. Same path, same distance, different result. She reached the house with nothing missing. That was the difference. Outside, movement took everything. Inside the tunnel, movement cost almost nothing. By the 5th day, someone noticed. Not the structure, the pattern. Smoke still rising from her chimney, steady, unchanged, while others burned more, fed fires constantly, tried to replace what kept leaving. One man walked up the ridge, slowly, carefully, stopped near the entrance, looked at the woven structure, then at the open land behind him. He stepped inside. Only a few steps at first, then more. His shoulders dropped slightly, not from comfort, from reduced effort. He reached the other side, turned back, walked through again, testing it, not understanding it yet, but feeling it. That was enough. By the next day, another came, then another, not asking, not explaining, just using it. Because in a storm like that, you don't need to understand something. You just need to know. It doesn't take from you. And the rest of the valley was still losing. Step by step, trip by trip, everything being taken. But here, the distance remained without the cost. When the wind finally loosened, it didn't feel like relief. It felt like something had been decided. Not by people, not by plans, by what had held. The storm didn't end all at once. It withdrew, slowly, leaving everything visible again. The ridge was still there, the land unchanged. But the valley below was different. Not louder, quieter. Fewer doors opening, fewer paths being used, fewer places still working the way they were built to. Carrie stepped outside that morning. The snow had settled into the ground, softening everything, hiding the damage beneath it. But absence is easy to see when you know where to look. The path between the house and the silo, still there, unbroken. She walked it once, slowly. Not because she needed to, because she could. No resistance, no pressure pulling heat away. No urgency to reach the other side. The distance remained, without taking anything from her. That was what survived. The people who had come didn't leave right away. Not because they couldn't, because they were still trying to understand what they had felt. They stood near the entrance, hands on the woven frame, pressing it, testing it, looking for strength, and finding something else. "It doesn't stop it," one of them said quietly. Carrie nodded. "It doesn't need to." Another man walked through again, slower this time, feeling the air, how it moved, how it didn't. "It takes less," he said. Not a question, an observation. That was enough. They went back down the ridge in silence, not arguing, not explaining. Because explanation wasn't necessary anymore. They had seen what failed, and what didn't. Spring came slowly, as it always does after a winter that holds too long. The snow receded, the ground returned, and with it, the damage. Some structures rebuilt, some abandoned. Some never used the same way again. But the changes weren't loud. They were small. Paths shortened. Buildings placed closer. Open ground reduced. And in a few places, something new appeared. Not copied exactly, not the same shape, but the same idea. Break the path. Reduce the distance. Lose less. Someone asked her later, when the ground had softened and the air no longer took from you the same way, "How did you know it would work?" Carrie looked at the space between the house and the silo. "I didn't," she said. "I just stopped losing something every time I walked it." That was all it ever was. Not a stronger house, not a bigger fire, just a different way to move through winter. Because you don't survive by staying still. And you don't survive by fighting everything. You survive by giving the winter less to take every time you move through it.